Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy and well. My name is Suzanne Moss, and I'm the Forever Forest Campaign Director for Save the Redwoods League, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation with Sam Hodder. Sam has been our CEO and president for over 6 years, and on behalf of the entire staff, we just want to express our incredible gratitude to Sam and our whole board of directors for the steady, thoughtful, truly compassionate leadership they have provided us during this incredibly challenging time. We are all so fortunate to be able to make adjustments and continue the work, which Sam will share about momentarily. I also want to thank you, our members, our partners, our friends, for joining us today, for your interest in the league and how we're doing, and for really sharing our care and concern for the health and the future of the redwood forest and the communities that depend on them. So not a day goes by and in the league office where we literally don't recognize and appreciate the role you all play in making our work possible. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. We look forward to hearing from you. After Sam's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. If you want to provide a question, simply go to the Q&A function in the middle bottom of your screen, and you'll be able to type in a question that will only be visible to league staff. So feel free to, don't be shy, no questions too big, too small. If you don't mind sharing your name and where you're from, and even perhaps your favorite redwood park, that would be cool. And we will respond to your question. And if we are not able to get to all the questions today, we'll be sure to get back to you and continue the conversation. So with that, I think I'll send it over to Sam.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. And thanks everybody for joining. We're so glad for the opportunity to connect with you. So happy day after birthday. Glad we can be together talking about the redwood forest as we think about our responsibility to lead towards a more resilient future. And as Suzanne said, I hope that everyone is safe and sound during these trying times. There are 3 primary things that I wanted to share with all of you today. First and foremost, that the league is healthy and safe, both individually and organizationally. And 2, I want to talk a little bit about the work that continues, sharing some of the exciting activity that is bringing hope and momentum in these challenging times. And then 3, want us just to take a few minutes together to think about this great moment of responsibility and opportunity. The reset button that we're all collectively pushing as a result of this crisis is going to change everything. And I think it's a moment for us to think about what we can do to change and impact that change for the better. So first, on a personal level, I want to say that I'm missing all of my colleagues and my direct interactions with the board and the council and our supporters and our partners that make our work possible. But I'm absolutely amazed at how well we have all adapted and how flexible and committed is the entire league family as we do this work from our homes. My wife is a middle school teacher, and so she and I are both working from home. She's teaching her classes from home, and 3 of our 4 sons are here doing their remote learning, living out their adolescence within the confinement of these 4 walls. So I can tell you that, first of all, if it isn't apparent, there's been some corner cutting on some personal operations and maintenance work. A little more salt and pepper, as someone noted on the chat bar. Thank you for that note. And I want to say that as a family, we're really relying heavily on our time outside right now with walks outside in the neighborhood or bike rides to nearby trails. We are fully aware of how lucky we are to have access to nature outside our door. And I hope that all of you have some opportunity to get outside as well. So first and foremost, the league is on solid ground. The pandemic hit as we were preparing to close out our last fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends on March 31st. And due to 11 strong months of strong philanthropic support and strong success with public funding and an extraordinary portfolio of conservation work delivered, we were able to finish the fiscal year in an incredibly great position. And furthermore, because our fiscal year ended on March 31st, we had the chance to take the time and make the budget adjustments necessary for the year ahead. And we did a lot of work to try and reduce our expenses, both those expenses that are forced by the shelter in place, reductions in travel, reductions in meetings and events, also taking the diligence to put off into the future any elective work that could be postponed, and find the savings necessary to prepare for what could potentially be some strong, challenging financial times in the future. But we have taken a prudent and disciplined approach, and yet we have sustained our momentum, we've sustained our full staffing, and we've continued our strong commitment to both our mission and our staff as we prepare for the challenges ahead, and finding opportunities in those challenges. So a little bit about the conservation work that has been continuing. And this has been fueled by the successes of the early phases of the Forever Forest campaign. That is our campaign on the heels of our centennial. Between that campaign for private philanthropy and our work to raise state and federal dollars over the preceding months and years, we secured enough funding to advance some outstanding conservation projects this fiscal year. So for example, in our protect work, we are advancing towards the purchase of Cascade Creek in the Santa Cruz Mountains. That spectacular 584-acre property that's within an hour's drive of millions of Bay Area residents. More than 100 acres of old-growth redwood forest, still here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, unprotected, with incredibly fast-growing and healthy second growth stands as well. And as important as the resources on the property is its location. This is right off of Coastal Route 1, connecting Big Basin with Año Nuevo State Parks, securing continuous protected habitat from the Santa Cruz Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. In addition to Cascade Creek, we've got several land transactions in the pipeline that are in their final stages of due diligence moving towards closing, such as completing the Maillard Ranch Conservation Easement Project and key additions into Redwood National and State Park that have been in play for a few months. And we are actively pursuing large-scale redwood land acquisitions as well that will be key to our vision to double the size of the redwood forest that's in protected reserve status and on a trajectory towards restoration. That is a key component of our vision, and we're seeing in this moment, in the upcoming potential challenging financial times, that there may well be a point of transition in the redwood forest. Periods of economic downturn often lead to acquisition opportunities that might not have been possible under normal circumstances. So in many ways, this may well be a moment of opportunity, and we have to be ready if and when priority acquisitions come on the market. In addition to our protect work, we're actively doing our restoration in the field. Under state's guidelines, we've been able to keep crews working in the woods to accelerate the pace and scale of forest recovery across the coast redwood range. So we have crews in the woods that are actively thinning forest stands to accelerate redwood growth. We are actively decommissioning abandoned logging roads to rewild the forest. And we are keeping field crews employed, even as we keep them safe with respecting social distancing guidelines and the safest possible working conditions. So in addition to our protect and restore work, we are doing our work to connect people to the redwoods once our parks are able to be accessible again. Getting the redwood parks ready for the people who need them. And that includes keeping our trail crews in the woods. There are crews, again, respecting social distancing, working on the trails around Grove of Titans, at Pfeiffer Falls in the southern end of the Coast Redwood Range. And we're doing a lot of our planning work around the public access for the Harold Richardson Reserve, the 713 acres of old growth that we acquired 2 years ago in Sonoma County. And on our science work, further underscoring the link between the redwood forest restoration and the urgent effort to mitigate the impacts of a changing climate, we will soon be announcing some extraordinary new scientific findings about this carbon storage capacity in second growth redwood forests. So our work is advancing. We have our conservation mission that continues to be delivered despite the constraints of our working environment. And it has been so inspiring to work with the public agencies in the Redwood Range and our partners up and down the coast and Giant Sequoia Range to advance our conservation work where we can. But again, as I said, I wanted to take a moment also to think about the work of Save the Redwoods League today. in this new world, because our world has changed so much, so fast, that it's important for all of us as stewards of this mission to think about where the redwood forest stands in a post-COVID-19 world. And I would argue that the redwood forest and our shared effort to protect and restore it can be both symbolic of and central to our collective recovery. Our redwood forest is its extraordinary parks, its ancient resilience, its accessible primeval wildness, its welcoming and universal beauty. Our redwood forest can help us to heal, and in so doing, reflect the resilience, the beauty, and diversity of the world we hope to reshape together. Our vision to accelerate the pace and scale of land conservation and restoration in the redwood forest, and to reinvest and reimagine how our redwood parks engage new generations, is more relevant and more urgent than ever. One thing that we have certainly learned through this strange and unprecedented experience is the critical role of parks in our health and our well-being and in our sense of community. People need access to the outdoors, now more than ever. Healthcare providers have said it, and we've seen it with our own eyes. Parks are fundamental to our health. We lose access to parks, and mental and physical health issues arise. And that goes for all of us, whether we are privileged enough to live within easy access to nature or not. It is worth noting that the inequities in access to parks mirror long-standing inequities in underlying health conditions laid bare by this crisis. Marginalized communities, in particular communities of color, the same communities with limited access to parks and open spaces, have been suffering the health consequences of this virus at far higher rates. A lack of accessible parks has made this crisis worse for all of us, and particularly the most vulnerable and the marginalized. And we need to do better. We need to ensure that the restorative health benefits of access to the outdoors is shared by our full community, that those marginalized communities that have long been excluded from the benefits of conservation are invited in and are asked to help lead. When we push the reset button, we will need more parks. We will need better parks. We will need healthy, resilient forests, not as an amenity, not as a privilege, but as an essential service. So when we start to climb out of this crisis and we wrestle with how to reshape our priorities in a rapidly changing world, let's remind ourselves, let's remind those crafting our recovery plans that our parks and forests are critical infrastructure to the resilient world we hope to heal together. That their active forest restoration, that through our active forest restoration, we will build our collective resilience, create green jobs in the field, and help us all to heal. That equitable access to improved park infrastructure will make our communities healthier. And that when the shelter in place is lifted, many of us will head first to our parks and protected open spaces to reconnect with each other and with the steady continuity of nature. Thanks so much to all of you for your generosity and dedication to our mission. Together, we are working towards leading our collective recovery in California and beyond and building resilience for our future. We are doing this by striving for a vision where our redwood forests are protected forever, restored to grow old again, and connected to all people. In the meantime, please keep in touch with us via email and our social media channels. We'd love to hear from you about your own stories of hope and resilience. And with that, I'd love to open this up to your questions and comments. Just type them into the Q&A box below, and I know we've got some that were submitted already. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Sam. So we have a terrific question from our friend Greg King, who we know. Hi, Greg. And he shares that some insights. There are two major components of the redwood forest, the ancient trees and the forest they create, and the quiet. And he shared that 2 days ago, he was in Prairie Creek Redwood State Park, and there were no cars on the Newton Bee Drury Parkway, and very few people were in the park. So for the first time in perhaps 80 years, the forest was as quiet as it was meant to be. So he's asking, why can't the Drury Parkway be closed to cars? Howland Hill Road, Jedediah Smith also. And can we create a shuttle stop at the Warwick Visitor Center that might be a recreational hub and bring tourists into these places? So that's
all right. Well, that's a great question. And, you know, you've named two of my favorite places in the world. Newton Bree Dury Scenic Parkway through Prairie Creek, and the Howland Hill Road through Jedediah Smith State Park. And first and foremost, let me answer your last question first. And that is, as we work to find the public and private funding to support the visitor center that we hope to build at Redwood National and State Park, at the southern end of Redwood National and State Park, that is exactly what's intended: the opportunity for a shuttle stop to reduce the number of cars, allow people to park and leave their cars and access the rest of the park through shuttle systems. And indeed, the quiet of the Redwood Forest is one of the things that's most inspiring, that is most spiritual. I think we can also acknowledge that the parks up and down the Redwood Range were created and located at a time when obviously the only way to get there was on the highway. And it was the construction of 101 that both accelerated the harvest and inspired the creation of Save the Redwoods League to establish these parks. So finding ways to both make the parks easier to get to so that people can enjoy them and be inspired, and so that cars aren't a part or aren't so central to the experience in the parks, is an ongoing balancing act that the park managers throughout the park system are struggling with. We're working right now as part of the Grove of Titans project that I mentioned earlier. That's on the Howland Hill Road. We're looking at the traffic conditions on Howland Hill Road and steps that we can take to reduce vehicular traffic, to enhance the peace and quiet, to make sure that that traffic isn't impeding or impacting the ecological conditions or the visitor experience, in considering different ways of controlling traffic along that road. The first step has been to make sure that we're able to restore much of the damage from trespassing in the area, and make sure that there's some facilities along that road to reduce the negative impacts of people wandering off trails and not having any facilities to use. So look forward to sharing our successes as we advance that Grove of Titans project. But the scenic byways and auto accessible roads within the parks, and I say the same is true with the Avenue of the Giants. It is a balancing act between trying to get people out of their cars to experience the peace and beauty of these places, and yet also making that peace and beauty as accessible to as many people as possible so that they can share in its inspiration.
That's great, Sam. Thank you. There have been a couple people asking the question, John being one of them, is how the current pandemic is impacting the league's ability to keep its current staff employed, how we're faring generally, how the staff's doing, and how we're surviving this.
Well, thank you for your concern for the staff. That's certainly our highest priority. This is a strange time for all of us. Many of us are juggling our commitment and our work for Save the Redwoods League with our obligations to care for young children. And yet the organization has done a lot to make sure that all the staff has the technology to be able to accomplish their work from home and to bring balance and sustainability to really difficult and unique working circumstances. I will say, as I said a little bit at the top, we've been very fortunate to be able to find savings in our budget for the coming fiscal year. And we've been successful in securing a PPP loan, the Paycheck Protection Program, to allow us to be sure that we can keep our full staff. That is fundamental to our being ready once we get the other side. We have so much work to do and we take our work so seriously. We want to make sure that when we get to full speed again and when the world opens up, that we are at full pace and that we're able to advance our conservation as the opportunities arise and make sure that the resilience of the redwood forest is part of our collective recovery. But thank you for your concern about the staff. I will say that they are an inspiring and dedicated and extraordinary group of professionals. Watching the team adapt to these new circumstances, find creative ways to keep their portfolios moving forward, creative ways to engage their partners and the externals that are so critical to our work, even as they've got new challenges in managing their home lives and their own personal resilience. It has been an inspiration.
Thanks, Sam. This question comes from our friend Lisa in Bonnie Doon. Hello, Lisa. And she shares, it's very inspiring to be thinking about the necessity of parks at this time. And is there thinking in the conservation community about how to use this pause in the economic recovery to think about climate change and other conservation legislation, now that we know the value of clean air and beautiful forests? So I know there's been some conversations in Sacramento about how to leverage this moment, and maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And as we would hope, the focus in Sacramento right now, both from the legislature and from the administration, is on the immediate emergency, the economic and the health emergency facing the people of California. There's a real focus on making sure that the sick have access to healthcare, that our health system is supported, and that we're doing our best to prepare for the economic challenge and the unemployment that's coming as a result of the shelter-in-place order. So there's some real focus on the immediate urgency related to the crisis, but there's also ongoing conversations about the recovery, recognizing that the shelter-in-place order will eventually start to ease. There will be a return to some new iteration of normalcy. And at that point, we need to start thinking about what sort of investments in our stimulus and in our resilience can happen and start putting in place today. So Save the Redwoods League has been active on both fronts. We've been working hard to be there for our partners, to be there for the most vulnerable in the redwood community, to find ways that we can support and share information that helps with the direct and immediate challenge that so many are facing. And we're working to build a coalition around a stronger resilience, about investment in our parks, about acknowledging this moment where the people of California flooded their parks after just 1 week of shelter in place. There's a real recognition that as the light starts to brighten again, as we start to gradually come out of the shelter in place moment, the parks are going to be the first stop. That is going to be the new front line. And we have to get ready. We have to make sure that we're investing in our park stewards and our park infrastructure and our park programming so that we're ready for the people who need them. There was a question about investing in climate resilience. And before the crisis began, there was already conversation, and we were actively involved in putting first to the legislature and then to the voters in November a climate resilience bond. Those conversations haven't stopped. They've just been augmented and adjusted to incorporate investments in stimulating the economy, looking at where there is overlap between climate resilience and green economies, looking at, for example, investing in the restoration economy, investing in the recreation economies of the rural North Coast, how we can put people to work in rebuilding our parks and in restoring our forests and creating that resilience in our landscape that's going to be critical for future health crises. So the answer is yes. It is, again, a delicate balance between being relevant to the immediate emergency and the very real suffering that's happening in our communities, and yet also keeping our eye ahead on opportunities to build resilience into our future.
Great. We've had a couple questions about Cascade Creek, one from our friend Lowell from Colorado. Hey, Lowell. And Kevin. Lowell wants to know a little bit about the quality of the forest, and Kevin wants to know how the campaign is going and if we're going to be successful at being able to acquire Cascade Creek in this climate.
Great. Well, the nature of the forest, I wish we could all be there right now so we could be sharing it in person. It's a beautiful place. And it's a really unique forest. I've bushwhacked up through the Cascade Creek Canyon and with a few board members and volunteers and supporters, and it is spectacular. And one of the things that's so unique about it is that the second growth that was in the lower, more accessible part of the canyon and spills into the old growth that was above a log jam that the loggers couldn't get to and is still virgin old growth. And some of the second growth forest is even taller than the old growth. We've been really surprised that, first of all, there's some old growth in there that's over 500 years old and remarkably tall. And some of the second growth that's around 100 years old is even taller still. So this is really healthy redwood ground. The second growth forest that's coming back is an exemplar of how quickly this forest can recover its old growth characteristics. You see that kind of that open canopy feel, even though it's second growth forest, it feels like an old growth forest in terms of distribution and the spatial relativity between the trunks of the trees and the ground cover, that extraordinary redwood soil that's everywhere. It really feels like an old growth forest. And so we've been impressed with certainly the carbon sequestration in that second growth forest, and see it as an example of how better stewardship of second growth forests throughout the redwood range can be such a critical ingredient in bringing back the habitat that we've lost, bringing back the carbon sequestration that we've lost, and restoring the forest to its former glory. In terms of our effort to acquire it, it's been, again, so inspiring. We have a $9.6 million goal. We are within 250,000 of that goal. So we recently had a challenge match of 100,000 towards that goal. That is, and our membership is responding already really well to that. Even under these circumstances, our members and supporters from around the country and around the world are seeing this opportunity and stepping up to try and help. So we're really excited about it.
Thank you, Sam. I just want to add that $100,000 anonymous grant is on top of an already $500,000 match. So from our friends Ralph and Carol. So we have a triple match. So any gift toward Cascade Creek will be tripled in impact. So I just wanted to put that out there. We've had a couple of questions about the giant sequoia. One in particular from Lucy, who had read about the recent essay about the sequoias dying. So she wanted to know if that was a threat to the coast redwoods as well. And then a few questions, as long as you're on it, about Alder Creek and an update on how we're advancing that conservation and public access opportunity. So.
Sure. Well, I'll just start riffing on that, Suzanne, and you can bring me back in case I'm not answering the whole question. But the question was about the fire risk in the giant sequoia, and referencing a paper that was done last year that highlighted some impacts of the Pier Fire from back in 2017. And the Pier Fire went through a vast expanse of the Southern Sierra, but in particular, some of it went through Giant Sequoia National Monument, and had a substantial impact on the Black Mountain Grove, which is a grove not far from Alder Creek and Red Hill, where, say, the Redwoods League recently acquired some local giant sequoia properties. And we all think of the giant sequoia as being the most fire-adapted forest species. In fact, they're fire dependent. And yet, for the first time in our in our ability to look back into the tree ring data, and the first time in our understanding, a fire that normally would have been a healthy fire, or at least a fire that the giant sequoia could withstand, actually killed over 50 monarch giant sequoia trees, because it was so intense and it got so high into the canopy that there was actually substantial giant sequoia mortality. And this is a heartbreaking reality that was only somewhat softened when we went out to visit the property last July and saw the carpet of young sequoia saplings that was growing up like a field of grass around the charred skeletons of these ancient sequoia. So at the one point, it was just so heartbreaking to see these monarchs, and yet that sense of rejuvenation of the next generation coming back. It really underscored the importance of our work together with the public agencies and private partners that are managing giant sequoia land up and down the Sierra Range, to work to address these issues head on, to find where the fire risk is most great, to do the forest thinning and fuels reduction to protect those giant sequoia, and to bring that ecological balance back to a place where prescribed fire can be an appropriate management tool. We are actively doing work up on the properties that we own up around Calaveras Big Tree State Park to do controlled burns and forest thinnings. We are doing the initial permitting of plans to do similar work on both the Red Hill property and Alder Creek, which we purchased just this past December. There's still a ton of snow up there today, so there's not much activity in the field. We wouldn't be able to get there anyway, but nonetheless, we're doing the planning work so that later this year and next for sure, we'll be able to do some of the fuels reduction treatments to make sure that those properties are fire resilient. Very different circumstance in the Coast Redwood Range than in the giant sequoia, of course. And it's been interesting to me to learn through our Redwoods and Climate Change Initiative and our work in dendrochronology, which is the study of tree rings, is through the core samples that we've taken through Redwoods and Climate Change Initiative, we can actually map the fire frequency in different parts of the Coast Redwood Range. And depending on where you are in the range, either at the southern end down in Big Sur or in the deep rainforest of Jedediah Smith by the Oregon border, we can map out across thousands of years the frequency of fires. And do our best to work with our agency partners to bring forest stewardship and forest management to bear that prepares for that kind of frequency. As you might imagine, fire risk in Jedediah Smith, where it rains more than any other spot in California, is going to be less than in parts of the southern end of the range or even in the mid-coast, where we're all familiar with the fire-scarred, hollowed-out goose pens that are such a classic characteristic of old-growth Coast Redwood forests. So we know that they're a fire-adapted species as well. And we also know that there's a lot that we can do to help these forests be fire resilient, so that the fires that come through, and we know that they will, so that the fires come through are good fires, or healthy, productive fires, similar to the fires that were consistent throughout the pre-colonial days. So we're working to restore that frequency and that fire resilience and fire readiness, because a lot of that fire resilience goes by the wayside after a clear cut. And second growth forest grows back like a dog hair stand, really thick, really dense, lots of dry, small twigs in a small monoculture that has a very different fire resilience than a mature, well-spaced, even mature second growth forest. So it's a great question. We are very lucky that our director of science, Kristen Shive, is a fire ecologist. She brings to Save the Redwoods League that fire expertise, particularly in the giant sequoia, but in the Coast Redwood as well, that is really fundamental to how we adjust our forest stewardship and our collaboration with public agencies to make sure that fire and fire resilience is central to our management goals.
Thank you, Sam. That sounds great. Switching back a little bit to the coast redwoods, there's been several questions about restoration. Tom is wondering about some of the thinning projects up at Redwood National Park, up into Redwood Creek. That's really inaccessible, and he's wondering if they just, drop the logs and keep them in place. So that was just to decompose. So that was his question. Others are wondering if we can put people back back to work in the parks doing restoration. And then some others who are familiar with our Redwoods Rising project were wondering how we were continuing with that work and staying safe at the same time. So it's kind of a triple threat there, but I think you can roll it all together.
I'll do my best, Suzanne. These are great questions, and all of them are right on point. So first of all, our restoration work as it relates to Redwoods Rising and other redwood restoration projects up and down the Coast Redwood Range. Again, with the ability to safely do social distancing in the woods as part of these restoration projects, it's one of those areas where crews can continue to work within the guidelines of social distancing. So that is good news for the forest. It's good news for those communities because we're able to, right now we have 40 people in the woods working on various restoration projects that are keeping dollars flowing in local rural economies, even as they are doing green jobs that are contributing to the resilience of the landscape, that are bringing the fish back through healthier streams, that are working to decommission old logging roads that threaten to erode into salmon beds. And of course, the forest work that is accelerating the growth of the second growth forest into old growth conditions. In terms of the actual choices that are made on the ground, and do have some of my program, some of Save the Redwoods League program team on the line here as well, and they could answer that question with clarity and accuracy, and I'm going to do my best and stand corrected. But every decision is made based on the needs of the given point of forest land, or the given stand. The question is, in some of these more inaccessible places, a lot of the tree thinning work that gets done is exactly right. It gets left on the ground as part of the biomass, as part of the nutrient cycle of the forest, and also habitat for terrestrial species. In some cases, and that's always going to be the objective as we do our forest thinning, sustaining the ecological condition, providing for habitat, that is priority number one. When we have met those goals, and in some certain cases, there's actually commercial product, if it's accessible, if there is a road that we can easily access, then some of that product actually goes into funding the work itself. And that in turn is keeping a lot of the expertise of the forestry community in place as a result of this restoration work. There's something poetic to me about the fact that we're working with the same family-owned companies that put in the logging roads to help us take them out. We're working with tribal crews to help do some of the work on the ground to make sure that, again, these rural communities have access to good natural resource related jobs. And through some of that accessible forest product that goes above and beyond what's needed to keep habitat resources and woody debris on the ground and in the streams, that's providing a revenue stream and an economic product for the community as well.
Thank you, Sam. One specific question about the initial findings of the study of carbon storage in second growth redwood forests. Aaron is very interested in hearing more, if you can elaborate on that study at all.
We're talking redwoods and climate change, the initial study, or the one that we're potentially going to be announcing in a couple of weeks.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe he knows something I don't know. Stay tuned. There'll be a big announcement in a week, Aaron.
Sure. Well, again, as I mentioned, we've been continuing our investment in science. We've been advancing what we call our Redwoods and Climate Change Initiative. And this is a partnership with Humboldt State University to establish a baseline study of plots of redwood forest in the old growth redwoods. We've expanded that beyond the initial 16 plots in the old growth to measuring tree response to changing climates in more impacted areas, in recovering clear cuts, in second and third growth forests, on the edges, in the east end of the range, the southern end of the range. So we can get a more complete picture about both the carbon sequestration of the redwood forest, the carbon capacity, rates of growth, but also how the forest is responding to changing climate, whether it be rainfall, other forms of precipitation, heat, et cetera. So that has resulted in some incredible discoveries. First and foremost, that the coast redwood and giant sequoia sequester more carbon per acre in the old growth forest than any other forest in the world by a long shot. And that the older and bigger the tree, the more they grow every year. There was one tree up in Jedediah Smith State Park that many of you have heard me talk about that puts on 2,000 pounds of wood in a single tree in a single year. It is a remarkable volume of wood and carbon sequestration in these forests. And furthermore, as trees mature and get beyond the 45, 50, 60, 70-year-old range, then the rate of conversion from sapwood into heartwood, and now we're getting into the deep details of the science, that rate of conversion increases as the tree gets older. And it's that heartwood, that rich red heartwood, that is so decay resistant, that is the most resilient, it's the most stable carbon. So what's amazing about the redwood forest is not just that it grows so fast, it's not just that the trees are so huge, and they are, it's that they are so resistant to fire and so resistant to decay, meaning that that carbon that's sequestered in those extraordinary world's tallest trees stay locked in for decades, even after the trees fall down. And what we're learning, and we'll share more in the coming weeks, is the extraordinary capacity of mature second growth forests. That even trees that are coming back from clear cutting in that first round of harvest of the redwood forest, they're growing back to the point where they are sequestering almost as much carbon as any forest ever measured. So the ability of the second growth redwood forests, and again, California has over 1 million acres of privately owned second growth redwood forest in commercial management. That 1 million+ acres has the capacity, if managed for restoration and if allowed to grow old again, has extraordinary capacity to store carbon, to create resilient habitat, and to be the park space that inspires future generations.
That's great, Sam. We're getting close to running out of time. I think we have a couple more questions that we can get to. And again, I want to encourage folks to reach out on membership at Save the Redwoods League with your question, and we'd be happy to respond offline. One of them, switching gears a bit, is you mentioned making sure people of color have equitable access to the improved park structure in the parks. And so wanting to know kind of some steps that we're making sure that we can provide equity in our park work.
Well, that's a great question. And for those that are interested in the work that the League is doing as it relates to equity, as it relates to broadening the network of partners that are engaging in redwood conservation, and being humble in how we invite a broader diversity of partners into our work, I'd encourage you to either go to our website or just Google "Here We Stand Redwoods." It's a video about our work at Harold Richardson Reserve. I think most importantly, our work in this arena is about learning and about reaching out to underrepresented audiences and inviting them to engage in our work, inviting them to help us learn how the redwood forest plays a role in their active interest and love of the outdoors. And also a lot of it starts with the League itself, thinking about our diversity, our culture within our staff, within our organizational structure, within and how we interact with our public and our partners. A lot of our work is about how we engage with the indigenous people of the Redwood Range and looking for ways to collaborate more actively with both as partners in land protection, in restoration, and bringing traditional methods to bear, and in making sure the stories that are told in the Redwood parks are respectful and engaging about the rich cultural history that is still alive in the Redwood Range. It's really important work, and I think it's going to be more important than ever as we recover from the current crisis. Our mission really, and I believe this fully, our mission is only fully developed if the broad community of California and beyond is able to benefit from it and experience it and share in the inspiration of these beautiful places. So it's something that we're really committed to, and again, you'll get a good sense of the why that this work is so important if you track down that it's just about a 12-minute video that was put together around our work in engaging underrepresented audiences up at Harold Richardson Reserve.
Thank you, Sam. For our last question, it is really about asking you to articulate why the work of the League is not done, even though most of the old growth is already protected. Why do we build buffers around our already protected groves? Why do the giant sequoias need the League to lead a critical fire resilience effort when almost all the giant sequoia are contained within either the monument or national and state parks? So really, that vision.
Sure. Well, let me jump right into that. That is, and as many of you know, we've spent much of the last few years as we prepare to transition into our second century, developing our conservation vision. And that question was fundamental to it. We looked at the fact that we had, that much of the old growth of both the coast redwood and giant sequoia was already protected. And yet we noticed that the land that we had protected, the old growth groves that we had protected, are islands. They're islands of old growth, isolated from each other, isolated from the habitat that links them to other parts of the Redwood Range, and bifurcated and with the logging roads that wind throughout the Redwood Forest. So those islands of old growth are surrounded by, again, 1.5 million acres of young redwood forest that is trying to grow back. Much of that 1.5 million acres, over 1 million acres, is still privately owned. And the opportunity to build and grow those islands of old growth, think of just a clump of green that slowly spills out across the Redwood Range, is our opportunity to bring back one of the most resilient ecosystems. Our founder used to call the Redwood Forest the original face of nature. And that's true. The fossil records go back over 200 million years, and all that's left is this stretch from the Oregon border down to Big Sur. And we have the opportunity to bring it back, to allow that forest to restore, to begin to do first the land conservation efforts, to take that second growth forest out of harm's way, because that 1 million acres is still on a rotation of continual harvest. To take that as much as we can, or strategic parts of that redwood forest out of harm's way, and set it on a restoration trajectory, to soften the edge between the old growth that we've protected and the clear cut that surrounds it. And in so doing, we can dramatically affect the carbon equation here in California. We were just talking about the incredible carbon capacity of the redwood forest. We can build resilience into our forest ecosystem. We know as conservationists and as people who love the outdoors that a fundamental challenge of our world today is the incredible rapid loss of biodiversity and loss of species diversity. The redwood forest, with its resilient ecosystem going back millions of years, offers a really unique element of resilience right here in our backyard that we can restore, where we can have this anchor, this refuge of biodiversity that we know is resilient to the climate changes that are coming due to their resilience to fire and due to the fact that even today they're growing faster than ever. So there's a really extraordinary opportunity now to begin to set that young redwood forest that surrounds the groves that we've protected, to set it on a restoration trajectory and grow the old growth of the future. And in the giant sequoia, the situation is critically important and fundamentally different. There's still conservation work to be done to bring together the last of the ancient giant sequoia. But one of the major challenges facing the giant sequoia is one of management. Much of that land is publicly owned, and yet because of a tradition of fire suppression over the past 150 years, we have been putting out forest fires that have been naturally occurring and healing that forest and setting the right kind of balance for centuries. And when we began excluding that forest, those fires, the fuel load has grown up to be so such a tinderbox and so tall and so mature that fires that used to be slow burning ground fires are now getting up into the canopy and creating kinds of disasters like the ones we witnessed at Black Mountain. So the stewardship issue around the giant sequoia is most fundamental. First, we need to understand it, understand the implications. Why did the Black Mountain fire burn the way it did? And then what can we do to make these forests more resilient? And then how can we make sure that we are creating access to these parks, even as we're doing the restoration treatments to manage the fuels and to bring back the natural function of the sequoia ecosystem? How can we create opportunities for people to access these places and be inspired by their beauty? Many of us have tried to go in into Yosemite on a summer weekend or into Sequoia National Park. There is such a demand. There is such an extraordinary volume of people that want to go and see and be inspired by these places. And there is a whole community in the Central Valley that is in the front yard of these extraordinary places that have not been engaged in their conservation and have not been considered as we create accessible park spaces. So that's our opportunity as well, especially with projects like Alder Creek, where we have protected over 500 acres of truly spectacular old growth giant sequoia that is fronting on a public road. And there's an opportunity for us to reimagine how this could be an educational and inspirational resource for the people of the Southern Central Valley, to create that connection and broaden the audience who has the Sequoia and Redwood parks as part of their lives.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sam, for closing remarks, but there has been a question that a number of people highlight. Maybe you could wrap it into your closing remarks, and that is really about how you got your wife to agree to the work at home beard. Kevin, his wife, made him shave it 3 weeks ago. So if you could share your secret on that as part of your closing, that would be great. But I'm signing off, and I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to share our work with you. And please continue to be in touch. And we just might do this again. Take care.
All right. I don't have a good answer for that. There's not a lot of support for this, I'm going to confess. Happens periodically every few years. I get back to my trail crew days, and but nonetheless, it's an ongoing conversation. The teenage boys love it here in the house. But I guess what I would close with is to say that I'm hoping all of you will hang in there. These are strange times. They're frightening times. And we're a long way from getting through it. And the challenges that we're facing are going to evolve substantially in the months ahead. But these are times for us to remember what we really care about and recommit to our priorities. And we're grateful that the League is among those priorities for you. And we are working really hard so that the Redwoods will be there for you when we're all on the other side of this challenge. So thank you, everybody, for your support for the League.